It was built after the destruction of Atlantis and therefore used to reunite the grid patterns that eventually brought balance to the destruction that was created at that time. That is why we have taken our cameras to Avebury to show how the huge stones were quarried and moved to create a huge energy pattern in the area where Silbury Hill and Merlin's Mound were constructed. At these two mounds you can create a resonance by sending the energy back and forth. We believe that the blocks were floated via levitation instead of being pulled by pulleys and ropes.
The store is in the middle of two inner circles. This inner circle is behind the store, this inner circle is behind the stone house over there. But it began there, the other part of the site, just over a mile away on the A4 London Marlborough Road, Overton Hill. It started life as oak wooden poles, a timber shrine, replaced and enlarged over thousands of years by an outer and inner ring of stones. Coming down the hill, crossing the old A4 London to Bath City Road, the original Roman road they built when they occupied us for nearly 400 years, past the largest man-made hill in Europe, Silbury Hill, past the longest burial chamber in England, the West Kennet Lombard, then over a mile of processional stones leading into the temple here. This avenue is a mile south through the town here. Unfortunately, it's on farmland, and there's only two stones standing, these on the photograph here. The rest were pulled down by the farmers into burning pits, strong wood, fire, heat, cold water, cracked up for building barns and walls. And if the farmers never used them and couldn't sell them off, they pulled them down their fields and buried them. July 99 we had an excavation there, uncovered many large stones. This is one of two burning pits, stone out burning pits. Following year, millennium year 2000, another excavation behind the stones. Another large burning pit was found with a deer pick antlers for digging. It was rather raped, unfortunately, that avenue. But we have found more stones actually. There's been another excavation there and found more. Now Dr. William Stukely, who drew this in 1723, saved Avebury from total destruction. Without this man coming here, Stonehenge, between 1721 and 1724, every stone would have been gone, destroyed. When he arrived here, he found them on the ground, half pulled down, ready for the chop. Avebury housebuilders and farmers just pulled them into the burning pits. Built houses, barns, walls, whatever. He reported to the highest authority of the land, and thank goodness it was stopped. Today they say we've got around about 106 stones standing out, a huge total of 657 in its original glory. These stones were on the hillside in huge numbers. They came down with the melting process of the Ice Age. They had no tools to quarry as such. They had flint arrowheads for hunting. There was two types, the barbantine, the small bird and fish, the leaf type, the large animal, flint axes for chopping the trees down, scrapers for taking the fat from the hides of the animal.
Can you speak a bit about why you think these stones were built or created in this way? The purpose of this formation is?
Well, again, they say the sun and the serpent.
Do you find that there's mystical properties to the area?
Oh, without a doubt, yeah. It's a mystique and magical place, Avebury. I mean, we were greedy for history here. We got everything. We got the oldest road in England because where it started on Overton Hill, the track left, goes up by this natural hill, goes 90 miles into Buckinghamshire. It's the oldest road in England, 6,000 years old. Well, as I say, my theory about the situation, they probably built it as a fertility town, the baby factory, and we're in the middle of it, this store. Every Beltane May, 6, the ladies walk this way, this is the inner circle behind the store. to a long pointed phallic stone, 22 foot high, standing proudly, which unfortunately got pulled down and chopped up for building in 1670. The boys walked this avenue, to the inner circle behind the stone house over there. To the female, they're male and female stones, this thing. So you have the penis and the eye. And if you look at the print, the Mr. Stukely drew in 1723, fallopian tube ovaries uterus.
Absolutely. Was that a period of great threat to life when this was built, that they would need fertility support?
Well, yeah, because they were dying off. Disease was killing them off like flies. I mean, they could hunt and feed themselves and ours, so no problem at all. It's just disease. I mean, it's went on all through the centuries anyway. Starvation and disease. When the farmers raped this south processional route, of course, it was starvation and disease. The Avebury house builders, the same. They had to build houses out of them.
And is there stories of extraterrestrial involvement or...
Oh yes, there's a lot of theories. Did they do this? Did they see another factor? The ditch that runs around here for 4/5 of a mile in a circle is twice as deep as what it is today, and that hill twice as high. Its original conditions. Only the elements and silting has reduced it. Excuse me. Sorry about that. I hope that didn't interrupt your filming. Sorry. Yes, there's a lot of theories. I can go deep myself personally, but I'm not going to today. Yes.
Is there still extraterrestrial sightings, like orbs and things in this area?
There has been. I've got a video of one. It was given to me on this West Kennet processional route. There's a lot of military around here, and people come to me and say, "Oh, I stayed in Avebury and I saw the lights, these funny lights." Of course, it's only manoeuvres on Salisbury Plain, 15 miles away. There's a lot of difference between military and other things. Yes.
But it's amazing the number of people that have taken photographs inside the Kennet, West Kennet bomb barrow. They've showed us, haven't they, when they looked. You can see the orbs in there.
We've
Several people have
managed
done
to
it.
get a lot of word in this area too, so...
Yeah, several people have showed us the picture.
Well,
I think even Nick Nicholson that does the book
Well-
there, he got caught in, didn't he?
Well, some people say that orbs are what make the crop circles.
Yes, that's right. I've heard this. But I've been in 3 crop circles. It's never been man-made, not to my opinion.
No.
No. I mean, I've been in 3 unexplainable. We know there's a couple of guys, they've made them in the past, maybe more, but not the 3 that I've been in.
Do you think the Avebury site is getting less powerful as time goes on, or more powerful, or the same?
It stays more or less the same in my book. Yeah. That's how I felt. I mean, I've been raised here, you see, and this is just how I feel.
Well, I want to thank you very much.
That's wonderful.
That's okay.
Wonderful.
Silbury Hill was the main generator vortex to move the blocks. Silbury Hill was built exactly like the step pyramid at Saqqara. Saqqara was the place where people like the men who used the rods of Ptah were trained. And interestingly enough, as they moved these blocks, their arms glowed green. So that is why the music that is used to move these blocks is the Celtic green sleeves, where it gets its name as they would stick the rod of Ptah into a platform and move the blocks, the heavy blocks, down a walkway. They actually played the music of green sleeves. The next temple you see is Imhotep's temple in Egypt. And you can see that these two temples are built very similarly. This is Merlin's Mound. The way you move blocks is by creating a residence. In Egypt it was done differently, but here, where they built the womb, it was done by bouncing energy back and forth between these two mounds. It's very similar. If you put your hand in a tub of water and move the water to one side, when it hits the side, it creates a bigger wave. Then as it hits the other side of the tub, it creates a bigger wave. As you move and add power at the wave crest, you create a larger wave, and this is called resonance. Once they got this resonance going between the two mounds, you can see on the hillsides, like West Kennet Burl and East Kennet Burl, how they actually moved the blocks. I am standing on top of West Kennet Mound overlooking Silbury Hill. It is positioned so that the energy off of Silbury Hill could be shot down through this mound. Many people say it is a burial mound. In the beginning it was never a burial mound. Later on it may have become a burial mound, but it was a tube to create a solitron. A solitron is a vortex sideways. The top of Silbury Hill creates what we call a standing columnar wave. Many people also call standing columnar waves scalar waves. And as you create it to a correct resonance, you can shoot that resonance down to a sideways scalar wave, which many people call a solitron. Then this energy was shot over to the sanctuary. The sanctuary was a series of revolving electrical devices, and this is how, when they quarried the blocks, they could resonate the block from the quarry, which was just very close to Silbury Hill, and with 4 men with a rod of Ptah carry that down. They built the Avebury first in the shape of a womb. Then they built Stonehenge. They have a wood henge, which we'll see later, near Stonehenge. The wood henge was first designed so that they knew how to place the stones so that they actually could create a vortex which would control the whole grid of the planet. What was necessary here was, after the destruction of Atlantis, the people on Earth had a large, huge amount of energy come down, and they cracked the Earth. So it was necessary to build Stonehenge as a place where they could record the tip and tilt of the Earth. But as you stand here on West Kennet Mound, you can actually see how they generated this energy to move these blocks.
Yeah, for miles and miles.
Yeah, right down a ley line.
As long as there's a ley line there, they can move it down the ley line.
And they can make a ley line by putting certain markers along the way, and then they could get these guys to carry these blocks, you know, because you had the rods of the tar, and you'd stick them right into the side, and they could carry 15, 20-ton blocks. This is all on the walls in Egypt with the rods. They have skull caps on, and they have guys with 4 rods sticking on a platform carrying these rocks.
That's right, yeah.
Caretakers. And
that's kind of the message I want the video to, you know, somebody, Knights Templar, somebody, other dimensional extraterrestrials are coming out here, and they are creating crop circles, which are really vortexes, to correct what ELF and what all of that is doing. You see, they come out here and do that. But when humanity takes the responsibility to do that, then things will change. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's important for everyone to really realise what's going on and get out here and put some love into it.
Yes, because these are all generators for that. You know? Thank gosh we got the Templars, and we've got the... Why it's quiet? Let's just do a vortex here, okay? Right up here in this mound. Okay? What we want to do is ask, do the vortex over there, and then visualize the energy shooting down here, shooting down to the Citadel, going over to Merlin's Mound, shooting back to East Kennet Mound, and shooting back to the Citadel after we do the vortex on top of Silbury Hill. Okay? Let's do it quick before we get a lot of people.
I think this will be alright still with...
Yeah, okay. From the point of light within the mind of God, let light stream forth into the minds of men. May light descend on earth. From the point of love within the heart of God, let love stream forth into the hearts of men. May Christ return to earth. From the center where the will of God is known, let purpose guide the little wills of men, the purpose that the masters know and serve. From the center which is called the race of man, let the plan of love and light work out, and may it seal the doors where evil dwells. Let light and love and power shoot from here to the Citadel, over to Merlin's Mound, to West Kennet, and back to the Citadel. Okay? Because that's how it works. You can see that in the layout of the land here, can't you? The East Kennet, I said West Kennet. But I'm sure that if you would match up East Kennet with Merlin, you would find the same way that you've got Silbury with West Kennet here. If they wanted to bring a block up from the coast, they would have 4 men with a platform with their blocks, and they could float it up here. And you know what music they used? Green sleeves.
Yeah.
That's right, you said.
They used green sleeves. And if you go down to Middle Egypt, the main song down there is green sleeves. That's the sacred song of Egypt. Green sleeves. Stonehenge is the control panel for the Great Pyramid. After the destruction of Atlantis, it was necessary to build a womb and a sword, the womb being Avebury and the sword being the Great Pyramid of Giza. In between those two, you have the control panel, which is Stonehenge. That is why near here they built this wood henge. Every time that we explode a nuclear weapon, or like in June 2nd, we will be exploding a 700-ton megaton bomb near Las Vegas. This puts a ripple in the grid. So near Stonehenge, you will now see another crop circle, which will bring balance to this whole grid of Mother Earth. This is why so many crop circles appear around this control panel. But the point we're making here, and we'll repeat this many times, is you have the womb in Avebury, the control panel in Stonehenge, and way down in Egypt you have the actual sword, which creates an antenna system that was designed to put balance into the grid. Just a note here before we go on. Why do we know this? History will tell us that the end of the millennium, on December 31st, 1999, the people in charge, like George Bush, decided to put a capstone on the Great Pyramid. They knew that this was the antenna system that could control the whole grid. Then Tony Blair and his friends in Britain built a hideous dome in London's harbour called the Millennium Dome. This is nothing but an antenna representing Stonehenge. That is why, after looking at the grid and understanding how to control the grid on the planet, this is why the Millennium Dome was built and the attempt to put the capstone on the Great Pyramid. What is important here is it did not happen. But what would have been sad if it would have happened, because it would have put a surge of energy through the earth and given us Y2K in a big time. Here are the two different types of stones that were used in Stonehenge. The bigger stone was quarried at Avebury and brought down here some 30 miles. Blue stones were quarried in Wales. It doesn't matter how and what time they were quarried. What matters here is they needed a difference in the electricity in the stones. Remember, Stonehenge is the control panel, and they needed the electrical difference in the electrical frequency. On the top, they would put something like the Ark of the Covenant, and this way they could send a signal down to the Great Pyramid, and as they rolled a vortex generator like a Tesla coil up the Grand Gallery, they could actually tip and tilt the Earth with this big antenna system. After the destruction of Atlantis, we cracked the Earth. Here is a simple picture of a crop circle in front of Stonehenge. Many of these crop circles appear yearly because of the emotions that the people on Earth have created. And constantly you have to remember Mother Earth is a living being, and she cries for us. But she has a system that she can talk to the divas, the fairies, the angels, the Knights Templar, ETs. They all come to her aid, and in this way she can balance her grid to try to save our lives. But if we continue in the fashion of using war and the war on terror, even she will have to give up on us. So it is time that we all learned how to use this energy to make her happy and to bring peace and love to the planet.
During the time just after the destruction of Atlantis, the earth was cracked by man's inability to control his ego and negative emotions. This same condition exists today. That is why the weather is out of control. The Great Pyramid of Giza was built as an antenna system to stabilize the orbit of the planet and to rebalance its polarity. It is important to understand the pyramid is an antenna system, and that Stonehenge is a control panel for this antenna system. That is why hundreds of crop circles appear yearly around Stonehenge and the surrounding area. As the US military and others bomb Afghanistan and Iraq, it also fractures the balance within the grid. The more the crop circles appear, to create a positive balance. As our weather patterns create huge hurricanes and tornadoes, it is necessary for the ETs and the White Brotherhood to create crop circles to again balance this antenna system.
This is the labyrinth at Chartres Cathedral. And as you walk, it clicks your brain back into the frequency of tachyon energy. In another video, maybe Duncan and I will explain it, but as you walk, you go part of the way and then you walk back. You go part of the way and walk back. This is the clocking action that you have to click your brain into to become an alchemist. Another part is to use the oils and to click your brain into the frontal lobes. It's all a process that has to be learned, and it is the process of alchemy. But as I said, as you walk into these labyrinths and into the womb of the big cathedrals, you are shot right up to Mount Bucharest and enter a 12th dimensional stargate. There you can become part of the answer instead of part of the problem, because you will be made aware of all that is needed in this world. In these cathedrals, you can find how the energy is moved. You have the rose windows, which we've showed you in the past. These are medicine wheels. They are solitron generators. And as you walk into the cathedral, you sit in the womb with a solitron generator, with music, and with all the stained glass coming in on you. This activates your higher consciousness. This is how the cathedrals were all set up to resonate your electromagnetic field. This particular Star of David is the sword and the cup. It's the same Star of David that the Marys used over their heart chakra, and they could lower it so they could use the diamond to create the Star of David. And as they did that, they could emit green fire out of their hands. When you walk into a room emitting green fire, you are a vessel of love, and you can heal everything in that room.
This quay near Alfriston, East Sussex, is a sign to humanity that now is the time to wake up to this knowledge, take responsibility of themselves and the planet, and to bring love back into the grid. The Creator God gave this message to humanity. It expresses unconditional love and carries no judgment. Who am I? What am I? As I am not. But as we are, I am. And to you, my creation, my perfect love is your perfect freedom. And I shall be with you forever and ever until the end, and then forevermore. It is our time in history to learn how to put love back into the grid. You see, there is only love. Fear, control, and terror is only an illusion to control human consciousness. If you lose your fear, you will gain your perfect freedom. Now is the time for change. Now is the time for humanity to take a step forward, open the door into the light, and the fear will lose itself.
What is the connection between the pyramids, Ayers Rock, the Bermuda Triangle, the Philadelphia experiment, Easter Island, and Devil's Sea? Well, they are all famous tourist sites except the Bermuda Triangle, which has a no-return policy. Other than that, they are all connected to the Earth energy grid. Like the 7 chakras in the human body, there are energy vortices all over Earth. Here, the general concepts of physics are given whole new meanings, with scientific anomalies and unexplained mechanics of nature happening like everyday occurrences. Gravity, magnetism, formation of energy are some of the many concepts that are twisted on their head in these places. The Bermuda Triangle is known to have massive magnetic poles, while the Devil's Sea has reported cases of levitation in the recent past. What is the true nature of Earth energy grid? What are the underlying principles of these concepts? We all know gravity, but is that definition right? Through the ages, many masters have given their definitions in the form of equations and research papers and whatnot, yet the phenomenon of gravity is not fully understood to this date. In the concept of Earth energy grid, gravity is a force due to the flow of energy from one point to another on the planet. Flow happens between 2 points, hence, some places have more of something while others have less. This is the governing theory for diffusion, electricity, osmosis, heat, etc. If gravity is the resulting force due to flow of energy, then certain points are bound to have more gravity while being moderate in other places. The Bermuda Triangle is such a place. Why do we have transformers near our homes? They are devices that alter the flow of current between 2 points. This is familiar to Earth energy grid. The only difference is there are energy transmitters all around the planet. Pyramids of Giza, Ayers Rock in Australia, Glastonbury in England, Kalai in India, and more are strong energy points where the surge can be felt. These are spiritual places for a reason. Where there is energy, there is spirituality. Real-life paranormal activities are slight modifications in the laws of nature. When the skeptics see it, they rub it off, saying it's all a coincidence. Only that is not the case. Through the concept of Earth energy grid, almost all paranormal activities can be accounted for with the simple concept of chakra energy. Now, anyone can connect 2 famous places to cook up an extraordinary story. Entire TV series have risen out of that, right? But there is something more to these places in Earth energy grid. There is a geometrical pattern connecting these transmitting centers. It is similar to the longitudes and latitudes of Earth, though in this grid it is similar to the structure of a carbon molecule or carbon chain. On connecting all the places, Earth looks like a crystal, more so like a polished diamond. Researchers are still exploring the finer details connecting the energy centers, and more information is expected in the future. Pyramids over these grid spaces were created more than 5,000 years ago by the Egyptians and Mayans. Patterns in these engravings are so close, but there seems to be no evidence of cultural exchange between the 2 civilizations. This summons the question of how people who were separated by a whole ocean could know the placement of each other's pyramids. Could it be aliens who laid the foundations of Earth energy grid? Or did they do something to the planet to disappear forever? There are many questions surrounded by skepticism and facts alike, so it is hard to follow one theory without considering the other. Several spiritual believers attribute Earth energy grid to God and other supernatural sources. Some feel they are holy places that originated the purest form of life. One thing is certain: Earth energy grid is a definite pattern for the flow of energy. How this happens or why is hard to know. Most of the historical architecture is centered on massive stones and large foundations. By today's evaluation, the stones that made the pyramids are impossible to lift by human labor, and if Egyptians had the sort of human resources required to do this, it would have taken them over 200 years to finish one pyramid. So, how did the stones go up? How was Stonehenge made? How were the megaliths of Easter Island constructed? These questions make our hearts pound and raise the goosebumps. can see there are 7 chakras on the Earth's surface. Then there are 4 world centers. There are 4 spinner elementals. And finally there are 2 dragon lines, which are world-class ley lines, the rainbow serpent and the plumed serpent.
Stonehenge being but one among these particularly popular attractions for the crowds. Stonehenge rests within the Stonehenge, Avebury, and associated UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Another member of this cluster of sites is known as Silbury Hill, which remained the largest man-made structure within Europe for many thousands of years. It's made completely out of chalk, and that is indeed an ancient pyramid which is some 4,000 plus years old. Once you learn these incredible facts regarding this ancient structure within the UK, just a stone's throw away from Stonehenge, you begin to suspect that Stonehenge may not be as impressive as it's made out to be, and that it may have been used to distract the public away from this phenomenal structure. Excavations of the pyramid have revealed that it took no less than 100 years to complete, and also housed an ancient cathedral. All attempts to burrow to the center of the pyramid in search of a burial chamber, in particular the tombs, have so far ended in failure. Like many other ancient sites across the world, we have little to no idea as to who the constructors of the pyramid were, its purpose, or indeed why they chose to construct it out of chalk. A new book published by English Heritage attempts to suggest that the 120-foot-tall pyramid was not in fact built to a grand blueprint, but was assembled by at least 3 generations of supposed Bronze Age Britons between 2400 and 2300 BC with the use of primitive tools. An explanation we found severely lacking in any real explanatory substance. Dr. Jim Leary, English Heritage archaeologist, has attempted to say that the creators were building the mound as part of a continuous storytelling ritual, and that the final shape of the mound was probably unimportant. He argues that the familiar outline of stepped sides and the flat top visible today is largely the result of Anglo-Saxons and later alterations. With the overwhelming amount of pyramidal structures dotting the Earth from around the same era, we found this explanation verged on ignorance. Were the builders of this grand ancient structure the same culprits who constructed the pyramids of Giza? Did they use chalk due to its abundance within the local area? And if so, why choose the center of Wiltshire in the UK to construct it? Is Stonehenge connected in some way to this enormous structure? Many questions are left unanswered because it seems certain schools of thought lack the capacity to entertain them as possibilities. If we were able to approach such topics with a free range of thought, perhaps we would realize so much more about our very old home and our very distant ancestors. Thanks for watching, guys, and until next time, take care.
on that hill. And I've sort of looked at the facts of this hill. It's called Silbury Hill, and it's been excavated 3 times in modern times. The first was I got some notes down here, so in 1776 by the treasure hunting Duke of Northumberland, and this guy excavated vertically down into the hill, and subsequently over the years his excavation has collapsed at least once or twice. Then in 1849 the newly formed Archaeological Institute engaged a chap by the name of Dean Merriweather, who employed miners to dig a huge shaft sideways into that mound, and then they supported their shaft using iron arches. And then once again in 1968 a chap by the name of Richard Atkinson sunk another shaft. These weren't the small shafts, these were huge shafts, large enough to drive a car into. And so obviously they were looking at removing a lot of material and hoping that they were going to take out with that material a pot of gold, perhaps, who knows. But anyway, the last shaft I think actually did reveal to the scientists how Silbury Hill was constructed. But anyway, there was some debate about what they should do now with the mound being so honeycombed by archaeology, and so they decided they would backfill the main shafts, which they did using roadstone, and this stabilised that particular area. But there was a central section where the miners had gone in and they'd made a cruciform tunnel system, and this was supported by iron arches, and so they didn't backfill that. They couldn't backfill it, or they didn't for whatever reason. And what's happened over time, the weight of the hill has buckled those iron arches, and this has now set up, and I quote, a complex system of fissures throughout the whole mound. And the huge irony of it is that the prehistoric people built Silbury, and there's clear evidence that they used to walk up it in an anti-clockwise spiral as in a procession. So over the years, millions of people have probably climbed on that mound, and it was built by the Neolithic people for people to walk upon. I wonder what those people would think now if they realised that people were forbidden to walk on their mound, which they once built to be walked upon.
Well, when you start examining other temples around the world, you realize that these other temples have a lot in common. That is, they're all very, very difficult to explain with vine ropes, copper tools, no pulley, and so on. One Egyptologist, the director of the Gizo Plateau, said, "There is not one grain of evidence of any advanced civilization ever having been in Egypt prior to the Egyptian." And I thought that was one of the most accurate statements I ever heard from an archaeologist. Because if you're looking for grains of evidence of sand, you will miss it. If you're looking, if you got your head in the sand, you will miss it. But if you look up from the sand and stop looking for grains of evidence, you will see millions of tons of rocks right in front of your eyes, giving you some pretty damn good evidence. The Grand Pyramid of Giza is made of 2,300,000 stones. 2,300,000 stones. It stands at 481 feet of altitude. Its base is 13 square acres. That is extremely large. When you take survey pictures, satellite picture of the apex of the Grand Pyramid at Giza, it is 1/4 of an inch off the center of the base. That's 13 square acres. 13 acres square. 1/4 of an inch off center. That's after placing 2,300,000 stones that you have cut with copper tools. Yeah, you need some pretty good moonshine to do that one. Well, I guarantee you that is extremely difficult to reproduce. In fact, there is no way engineering companies on this planet could ever reproduce that. Even with all of our modern technology, if we give them billions and billions of dollars, they couldn't come up with anything like that. Because if you divide 1/4 of an inch error by 2,300,000 stones, the accuracy at which you're placing these stones is outrageous. And we can't do anything like that. Our most accurate buildings, like telescopes, are not that accurate. They're not even close to having that kind of accuracy. Go ahead.
So you could say we've just barely come out of the Dark Ages.
Basically, or we got into the Dark Ages. Because it seems that there was people that were doing a heck of a lot better than us. So when I was looking at this, I'm like, wait a minute. That doesn't happen that way. Why is it that we think, that this is taught as facts to children in schools every day? That the pyramids were built by people pulling on vine ropes? And you know why? Because in the 1800s, a bunch of English archaeologists showed up in Egypt, and that's the only thing they could come up with. And because they had PhDs and they were very respected archaeologists, since then, everybody is repeating the same thing. And somehow, a theory that's completely unproven became a fact. In fact, you will not get a PhD in archaeology if you say anything else about the pyramids. I guarantee you that. You cannot get a PhD in archaeology by saying the pyramids were built by Little Green Man. This is one of the problems with education. a whole bunch of people repeating what they've all been taught doesn't advance the field very rapidly. Because everybody is repeating the same thing, you're not going anywhere. So, you know, but these archaeologists never actually, you know, I know they're not mathematicians, but this is simple mathematics, okay? You take the number of stone, they tell you that the pyramids had to be built in 20 years, okay? So that the dynastic Egypt worked. And then you calculate how fast they had to put the stones in. At 7 days a week, 10 hours a day, 365 days a year, for 20 years, they had to place the stone every 2 minutes to finish the pyramid on time. With that level of accuracy. Never mind. But then the archaeologists say, no, those were farmers. They could only build the pyramids during the time of the flood of the Nile when they couldn't work in the fields. 3 months out of the year. See, when they had that 3 months vacation, hey, let's all go and build a huge pyramid. So they went out there and built pyramids 3 months out of the year. You redo your calculation, now they have to place a rock every 2 seconds to make it in 20 years. So that really doesn't work. Because it's not like you can take these huge rocks and average 2 tons, some of them up to 40 tons rock. Like in the King's Chamber, there's 100 slab of 40-ton pink granite rock. Okay? These things at 135 feet of elevation in the pyramid. It's not like you go, hey Joe, catch this one. Hey Joe, catch this one. You know? And the other guy on the other end is like putting them in. You can't do that. And it doesn't matter if you got 100,000 people. You still can't do it. And you know, they tell you they did that by rolling the rocks on logs. Well, they might have not noticed, but these pyramids are in the middle of a desert. You need a lot of logs to move 2,300,000 stone. Where did the wood come from? When you ask them that, they say, oh, they imported it from Europe. I see. Was this like some catalog, you know, 1-800 ordering? Because, like, as far as I know, the Egyptian didn't, like, you know, easily navigated into Europe, cut millions of logs they would have needed, and brought them back. There's no evidence of that. So, but even more fundamental, I'll ask you, you know, even more fundamental. The fundamental axioms of archaeology is that you observe and decode the remains of a civilization to understand its morses and its you know, its activities and all this, right? Okay. There is over 1 million hieroglyph walls in Egypt. Thousands and thousands of hieroglyph walls in Egypt. In the temples, in the tombs, everywhere. They tell us how they made love, they tell us how they eat, they tell us how they went to the washroom, they tell us everything about their life. Everything. Not one of those walls mentioned building the pyramids. What? They forgot? You're talking about something that would have taken a huge effort. You'd think they would have put at least a little wall somewhere saying, oh, by the way, we built the pyramids. No. None of that. In fact, the archaeologists say not only that the pyramids built, that the Egyptians built the pyramids, but they say that they built them as tombs. Okay. What's the evidence? Zero. Zilch. Not one pyramid was ever found to host a mummy. Not one mummy was ever found in a pyramid. Not one. And I'm not just talking about Egypt. I'm talking about all around the world. And it's funny because you know how they do all these like historic, History Channel and all this stuff. They have all these nice documentary, and they show you where they found the pyramids and the and the tombs and all this and Tutankhamun and all this, and then they splice and they cut directly into the pyramids. So you think the mummies were found in the pyramid, but in fact the mummies were found. Most of the king's mummies were found in the King's Valley, far from the pyramids. Some of the pyramids, they had to dynamite their way into the pyramid. They couldn't find an entrance. When they got inside the pyramid, there was the sarcophagus, the so-called sarcophagus in the middle. It had a slab. Some of them had slabs that were like 40 tons slabs sealing the sarcophagus. They would unseal it, pull the slab off, still no mummy. What was their conclusions? Grave robbers. Those grave robbers, they were unbelievable. They just walked through the walls because they had to dynamite their way in. So those grave robbers got there before. They must have walked through the walls, got in there, picked up the 40-ton slab on top of the sarcophagus, pulled all the stuff out, including all the bones and everything else, which, wonder what they would do with, and then, closed it back up, resealed it, just to make sure they didn't disturb anything, and then walked back out with all of this stuff. This doesn't make sense. Now, there's other things that don't make sense. There's nowhere on these pyramids that it says, I built this for my tomb, I was born then and I died then. You think if you build such a great monument, at least you put your name on it. There's no hieroglyphs inside the pyramids. And Lord knows that the Egyptians put hieroglyphs everywhere. So why didn't they not write inside the pyramids? So those are all huge contradiction to the concept that the Egyptians or the Mayans or the Incas or the Chinese or so on build their pyramids. That's all logical. Pyramids were not tombs. Pyramids were not built by Egyptians. No Egyptian text talks about the Egyptian building the pyramids. The texts do talk about monuments, enormous monuments being built. And who they say built them was the sun god. The Mayans, the Incas, the Chinese, the Japanese, all cultures that have these buildings, none of them say we built it. All of them say the sun gods taught us how to build, how to talk, how to write, how to do all this stuff. This is an ancient symbol that was found on a granite pillar in Abydos, Egypt, in a temple called the Osirian Temple. Why is it that this object, this drawing, which is on the 100-ton pink pillar in the middle of that temple is not in any picture books or history books anywhere or archaeologic books anywhere. It took me 10 years of research to go through all the books that were written on the Azarian temple, from the first papers that were published from the archaeologists that found the temple to eventually, you know, all the papers and the books that were written. None of them had this picture in it. The way I got this picture is that a friend of mine went out there and took it. Okay? Why is it that this picture is not in there? I'll tell you why. Because this graphic is not carved into the rock. It's not etched into the rock. This graphic is actually burnt, laser burnt, into the atomic structure of that pillar. Now when you think of ancient civilization 5,000 years ago, you don't expect them to be doing laser burn on, you know, hard surfaces at high levels of accuracy. Okay? Archaeologists have a really hard time explaining these things. When they can explain something, usually the tendency is not to popularize it. So they leave it out. Some of these symbols that are in the Azarian temple, there's no writing in all of that temple. Not one piece of writing. All there is these things. There's a few of them. Some of them are chipped. Well, the laser burn is through the rock. So that actually, even if you chip it, it still appears on the rock. We have no current technology to reproduce this. That's why you don't find this in history books. The other thing is that the Azarian temple is 50 feet below all the other temples at Abydos. The archaeologists tried to say, oh, the Egyptian dug 50 feet and then started building. Well, the Egyptian never did that to any other building. And actually, when the geologists went there, they went, no, that's not the case. The building was there and sedimentation piled up beside it. Well, when they calculate how long it would take to get 50 feet of sedimentation, that temple is no longer 4,000 to 5,000 years old. That temple is 9,000 to 12,000 years old. Maybe 10,000 years old. That's why archaeologists really don't like that temple. In fact, they very rarely discuss it. The Sphinx. Most people think that the Sphinx is built. The Sphinx is not built. The Sphinx was carved. The Sphinx was carved right out of the enclosure of the Giza Plateau. Now, when you look at the paws of the Sphinx, you might notice that there's like brick-like structures on it, so it looks like it's built. Those are repairs that were done later in history. But the Sphinx was carved, and actually there's evidence that the head of the Sphinx was recarved. It used to be a lion's head, but it was recarved into a pharaoh's head by one of the pharaohs. However, there is erosion patterns on the Sphinx that is a telltale sign that the Sphinx had to be carved when there was a lot of rain hitting it because of the erosion on it. We know when the last time this area had a lot of rain, and that was approximately 10,000 years ago, which matches the Osirian temple at Abydos. These blocks here consist of the Sphinx temple. They're the blocks that were removed from the side of the Sphinx to carve the Sphinx out. Now, if you were removing blocks from the Sphinx enclosure to build a temple in front with the blocks, would you use a 100-pound block, 500-pound block, maybe even a 1,000-pound block? Even like 3 or 4 pound blocks. That would start becoming a problem with our current technology, especially in the sand, and especially if you got to stack them. Okay? But the ancient Egyptian or whoever 10,000 years ago built this didn't remove 100-pound block. They removed 200 tons block. And we know that they were removed from the enclosure because the stratification of the layers of rock matches where they were removed from, and you can actually tell which rock came from exactly where in the enclosure. 200 tons. See, this is a little person here. See what I mean? It's not trivial. You don't just grab a 200-ton block with your buddies and move it over there. The current we actually at this time lift about 200 ton with the largest land crane on Earth. And we move it only from a truck bed into a boat. We can't roll with it. We can't go and like move it around the sand, and certainly we can't stack them on top of each other to make a temple. 10,000 years ago, somebody was moving 200-ton block with ease. I think this is fantastic. You know, because this is about our true history. This is about what happened on this planet prior to our current history, prior to our current thinking. Look at this statue. Ramses II. When they found this statue, it was laying like this. It had fallen over in the desert. It's made out of pink granite. It's perfectly polished with copper tools. And this is a person beside it. The statue itself, when they found it, they said, "Oh, let's just move it over there because we're going to build the Ramses Museum." So the engineers came and they said, "Well, okay, but then we'll have to cut it in pieces because this thing is approximately 1,000-ton solid block of granite. 1,000 ton. That is 5 times more than what we can lift today with a land crane. So instead they built a museum around it. It was much easier. This is not the only 1,000-ton block that was found. The pillars on each side of the entrance of temples in Egypt, they are called obelisks. Many of them were in excess of 1,000 tons. And they all come out, all these large objects, come out of a quarry that we know where it is. It's hundreds of miles up the Nile. And the quarry is on the other side of the Nile over a mountain range. Okay? When you ask archaeologists, how did this get there? They say, they cut the trench from the Nile across the mountain range into the quarry. And then they let the water in, and then they picked up the object, they stuck it on a barge, and they floated it down the Nile. But there's no evidence of that trench ever being cut. How do you lift up a 1,000-ton object and put it on a barge without sinking it? I mean, that is just not appropriate. It just doesn't happen. So when you look at this, you start to wonder, who were these sun gods? And were they able to go all around the world? Under the water in Japan, recently, pyramids were found. These pyramids are at 19.47 latitude. They're enormous pyramids. All the fishermen knew that they were there, but they didn't think it was important, so they didn't tell anybody. And here is another picture of these slabs. They're huge. They're huge blocks. What's really interesting about those is that, you see, you can't date a pyramid. You can't date a monument, because carbon dating only carbon dates. You need carbon. Rock doesn't have much carbon in it. Not enough to date it. It has silica, and it has, a certain rate of decay and all this. You can date how old is the rock, but that won't tell you when it was cut and assembled into a pyramid. Okay? So actually, archaeologists don't date the monuments. They just find the bones of this poor fellow beside it, or they find a fireplace beside it or something, and then they carbon date that. And they say, oh, it's this dude that built this thing. You see? But when the pyramid goes under the water, now coral growth starts to happen shortly after. And that's carbon datable. So now you can tell at least when the pyramid went under the water. Well, when they carbon dated these pyramids, they went under the water at least 10,000 years ago. The meltdown of the last ice age. When the water rose and covered the earth. There is over 500 flood stories in ancient civilization all around the world, talking about an advanced civilization that was there prior the sun gods, and the flooding that occurred that destroyed most of that civilization. Here we might be seeing some of the vestiges of that civilization. But anyway, these pyramids were found in Egypt. These ones are datable to 10,000 years. Check out this picture. This was taken during the Second World War by an American pilot that was lost over China. And he saw this pyramid, and he took a picture, and he brought it back home. He survived the whole thing and brought the picture back home. And everybody, a few years ago when I would present that, people would say, oh, well, that one is iffy, this could be a hoax. Well, okay, Nobody believed them, except that the Chinese government in the last few years have released these pictures. There's hundreds of pyramids in China. And the Chinese government actually got the farmers to farm on top of the pyramids so that they wouldn't be so apparent by satellite. And the reason why, so here's the poor farmer that got the job. The reason why they were doing that is because they didn't want the Western world to know about these pyramids. Why? Because the legends that comes with these pyramids is that the sun gods built them, and that the sun gods were blue-eyed, blonde-haired people. As far as the Chinese government looked at this, blonde-haired, blue-eyed people had to be Europeans. And the last thing they wanted was European people being responsible for some of the most ancient knowledge of the Chinese tradition. So they didn't want those pyramids to be known by the West. They did find the mummies of these blonde-haired, blue-eyed people in the high desert of China. Over 500 mummies were found. All very tall, absolutely not Asian people. And then you go to the forbidden city of China, the city that holds all the knowledge of the universe, all the knowledge of the sun gods. And at the entrance of the city is the Sphinx, the lion, which in both Egypt and Chinese tradition are the guardian of the knowledge. They guard the knowledge under their paws. And when you look closely at the paw, what do you find? A spherical intersecting pattern of the flower of life, which generates 64 tetrahedron grid. Guardian of the knowledge. Fairly old, but this section of China was largely rebuilt and fairly recent, you know. But it's all coming from very ancient tradition that's passed on orally throughout the ages. That's why you find still the knowledge being present. Although the knowledge of the sun gods has been very, very confused and diluted throughout the ages. So, do we have evidence of the sun gods? We do. These are skulls that are found in temples in South America. This is in the Peruvian Museum. I call it Conehead. When the archaeologists found this, they said, oh, this is the result of skull deformation. You know how the ancient tradition, they would bend their head to deform them? Now, they did do that. You know, this is the bust of Nefertiti, for instance. Tutankhamun did have a deformed head. There's many skulls like that. But when you read the ancient texts and they say, they talk about deforming their head, they say that they did that to imitate the sun god, to become sun gods themselves. Now, if you deform your head, right, today, it doesn't matter how much you deform it. you will never be able to exceed the volume capacity of your skull. Your head might look really weird, but the volume inside will be exactly the same. In these cases, the volume of these skulls, the inside volume of these skulls, are over twice the natural volume of the human skull. The normal volume of a human skull. These are not the result of skull deformation. You cannot do that by deforming your skull. The other thing that's interesting is that the hole at the bottom of the skull here, where the atlas goes in, the spine, tells you how big the person was, right? Because you can figure it out from the size of the spine. These people had to be between 12 and 15 feet tall. There was giants on the earth. Many ancient texts talks about the sun gods as being giants. These are very, very big people. And the fact that there's multiple of these skulls found in temples all around South America tells you that it's not the result of some deformation. These skulls were found in South America and Mexico. Here is some of the Mexican skulls. The early ones were South American skulls. This one actually has a larger volume than the cone head. And this one is the largest volume ever found. Mexico. And the facial features are missing, but the skull is intact, and it's enormous. That's the eye sockets, so you can imagine how large that forehead was. And here is the each lobe, each hemisphere of the skull, of the brain, seeming to have developed independently in this case, and making it enormous. Go ahead.
On the prior slide, am I correct in saying that the orbits of the eyes are a good deal larger than normal?
Oh yeah, much larger than normal. This person had huge eyes. And there's all sorts of features on these skulls that are not normal. For instance, in these cases, many of the facial features in the jaws don't belong to an Homo sapien. They're a mix between various species that are not supposed to be mixed together. Here's Tutankhamun. Even Tutankhamun seemed to have a larger than expected skull. Here's his brother as well. Now, there's many instances in the Egyptian and the Mayan and the Inca scripts where they describe that the sun gods, including in the Bible, where they describe that the sun gods actually mixed and had children with women of the human species. And that generated a whole new species, which was half sun gods, half man. So here, these might be evidence of this altered species, of this mix. And you would expect that these people would become pharaohs, because they would have all sorts of capacity that the average man didn't. So here, we're starting to see a whole new picture of the history of human beings. And mingled in that picture is the information that these sun gods tried to give to man.